Quentin Tarantino is one of the most prolific auteurs of the 21st century. His films, both critically acclaimed and financially successful, are arguably best known for their cathartic bloodshed, reliance on conversational dialogue to drive plot and create subtext, his play with narration, and the non-linear chronology of his narratives. Additionally, it's no secret, Tarantino is a remix artist, drawing upon a large pool of references to mix genres, narratives, music, mise-en-scène, compositions, and much more. All these aesthetic elements, particularly regarding his use of suspense and subtext-filled dialogue, have been explored at length by other video essayists.
Violence in them is an important reason for the response his films get. Today we'll explore the history of violence in film, and how Tarantino uses it in his own movies.
Ultimately, Tarantino uses violence as a means of control. He describes himself as a conductor with an orchestra made up of the audience's emotions.
So it's like, laugh, laugh, laugh. Stop laughing.
Tarantino writes such great scenes because he often builds an anticipation towards the future, whether it be the next scene or simply the next line of dialogue.
The influences of other films on his work is tremendous, and many shots and scenes can literally be found in old movies.
In just 2 pages, Tarantino has laid the foundation for suspense. But this alone is not enough to create the intensity of suspense that we feel by the end of the scene.
But what is missing from these fine analyses is a meticulous and systematic close analysis of Tarantino's command of the film form, his use of stylistic elements in relation to his storytelling.
Immediately we align with the farmer and his family. The first viewpoint here is between 2 of the daughters, as if we're standing with them. When we get a reverse shot, it seems like the view has rotated a full 180 degrees. This square-on framing feels very limiting. It traps us.
The lack of a close analysis of Tarantino's style is perhaps due to his remix predisposition when making his films. This is a product of his cinephile upbringing, as it's no secret that Tarantino worked for many years at a video store. It is also a product of his foregrounding of violence, dialogue, and non-linear storytelling that has created the current analytical paradigm.
Dialogue.
You gonna bark all day, little doggy? Or are you gonna bite?
The often graphic yet stylized violence, or his use of non-linear narrative structure.
He's an eccentric auteur with his own helping of idiosyncrasies and is not known for artistic restraint that other key auteurs are arguably known for. His stories typically are quite vulgar and operatic, dealing with themes concerning ego, toxic masculinity, and greed through bloody tales of revenge and retribution. Despite these frequent rhetoric and stylistic indulgences, I argue in this audio-video essay that Tarantino's approach to filmmaking and many of the stylistic devices and techniques employed are quite sophisticated and are not simply arbitrary homage or pastiche. They are, as Bordwell argues for film style, the very flesh of the work, the very essence of storytelling.
I like that shot.
This sophistication is arguably best demonstrated by Tarantino's divisive 8th foray into the film form, The Hateful Eight.
One of them fellas is not what he says he is.
What is he?
While many of Tarantino's films would be ideal for this close formal analysis, The Hateful Eight, with its slower pacing and emphasis on building and crafting distinct sequences within a contained space, makes it ideal to observe not just how the story functions, but how the film's stylistic elements support and reinforce the storytelling elements such as plot, narration, and most importantly, the unfolding mystery narrative.
2 of y'all was working with him. All y'all is. But only one of you poisoned the coffee.
By focusing on the stylistic elements such as mise-en-scène, editing, sound, and cinematography, I want to raise awareness as to how Tarantino's mystery narrative is reinforced through these stylistic elements. This will be accomplished through close meticulous analysis of the oral visual rhythms and patterns of 3 key sequences, In particular, this analysis will argue that Tarantino uses stylistic elements such as widescreen deep space compositions in interplay with off-screen space, staging, camera placement, movement, and the importance of sound, among other stylistic elements that engage the viewers and encourage them to play along at home by presenting several different solutions to the unfolding mystery narrative. A good opening sequence will not only introduce the key ideas present in the film, but how the film intends to articulate those ideas through the film style, and it's in this opening sequence that Tarantino introduces his key stylistic elements that will play a large part in the mystery to come. The first stylistic element that presents itself from the first second of the Hateful Eight resides not in the visual, but instead the oral. The spectator faces pitch black darkness as Morricone's brooding, non-diegetic orchestral score makes its introduction. There's mystery with a sinister hint of malice in the air. Morricone's score immediately evokes The Thing, which Tarantino borrows some unused tracks for later in the film. It's also similar to Morricone's spaghetti western scores for Sergio Leone, in that it's just plain cool. Something that Tarantino always strives to achieve in his films, being strongly inspired by Leone's spaghetti westerns. But I digress. The first shot of the film consists of a slow, methodical fade into an extreme long landscape shot of a snowy mountaintop. What is immediately striking through this long shot is the aspect ratio. The Hateful Eight is shot using an anamorphic wide-angle lens with an aspect ratio of 1 to 2.76. The first to be shot using 70mm Panavision since the 1960s. The exact same lenses were used for Ben-Hur, allowing landscapes to be shot in high detail. The technique is not just a gimmick. The choice is important in creating widescreen compositions, utilizing deep space that becomes the foundation for Tarantino's approach to reinforce the narrative through the play with the film's form. The added width to the frame allows more space for the audience to examine and explore. We then cut to the second shot, an ominous sign of movement as birds flutter and exit the left of frame. The music is doing much of the heavy lifting, still coloring our perception of these images of barren desolation. The sounds of the birds fluttering also draws our attention to how Morricone's musical score is not the only auditory source on the soundtrack. The diegetic wailing sounds of the wind will be a key sonic motif throughout the entire film, evoking a sense of place and immersing the viewer further within the story world. It's also a quick homage to Sergio Corbucci's The Great Silence, a film that is a clear source of inspiration here, utilizing the landscape to reflect depravity and a lack of humanity. Moving on now, the third shot, another long shot of the landscape, makes it abundantly clear of the trajectory of the rhythmic oral visual makeup of this sequence. A series of extreme long landscape shots showcasing a barren landscape and colored by Morricone's sinister score, establishing the mood but also training our eyes to scan the screen for any movement or narrative progression. As shot 4 introduces a slow pan left, it becomes clear that there is little civilization in this barren, desolate land. A fence sign of division, a boundary is the only sign of frontier society. With the 5th and 6th shots following suit, Tarantino and his DP Robert Richardson use widescreen aspect ratio and the extreme scale of these shots to encourage the viewer to scan every inch of the screen, looking for signs of life or movement, with the score holding the viewer in suspense, hinting at something more sinister and mysterious at play. Then with the 7th shot, we're suddenly thrown into a forest with a wide-angle medium shot, the trees now obscuring what lurks inside this vast expanse of untamed wilderness, further encouraging us to examine this new element of the mise-en-scène. A quick cut to a closer shot of 3 trees welcomes our title card, bringing forth the main melody alongside Tarantino's signature yellow text. After that cold open, establishing a sinister mood and encouraging the viewer to scan the screen for any audio-visual detail, a crucial component of how Tarantino wants his audience to engage with the film's narrative and compositions, it's time for the opening credits. Another cut leads us to a face-to-face with Christ himself in an extreme close-up, a juxtaposition in shot scale from the cold open. Text continues to intermittently appear on the left of frame. This is no static shot, and the camera on a crane slowly and methodically pulls back to reveal a wintry graveyard. Snow slowly drops from Christ, left abandoned, his sacrifice long forgotten. Suddenly, as the drums sound out, a figure in the background of this deep space composition reveals itself, as the music continues to rise in intensity and volume. The figure is obscured by Christ. As the camera moves to the right, positioning a highly composed image between foreground and background, between the approaching figure and stationary Christ. The text itself moves to the right of frame, drawing our gaze and attention to reinforce this spatial relationship. Typography is playing an active role in this title sequence, an element that does not usually get much attention in film analysis. As the camera continues to move backward, the statue is clearly larger given the proximity of the viewfinder and the mysterious figure, small in stature but approaching at an alarming rate. As the maestro himself, Ennio Morecone, appears in text, the music delightfully now reaches its roaring and terrifying climax, and further mimics the approaching speed of what we can now make out as the stagecoach, creating a shift in narration, the mystery now revealed. The entire sequence is Tarantino at perhaps his most economic. The oral visual rhythms, particularly the interplay between foreground and background, and methodical attention to camera movement, framing, and placement, withholding and revealing crucial pieces of narration, what this approaching figure is, facilitated by the duration of this long take, in conjunction with Morricone's score coloring the image in a thick blanket of approaching malice and murderous intent. It appears this was just an ominous warning, introducing the key stylistic rhythms and repetitions, which we will see play out with greater complexity in my analysis of the next two sequences. As the stagecoach exits the right of frame, a delayed cut consisting of 3 seconds further adds to this ominous atmosphere, as the music appears almost to have been turned off prematurely, leading to a sudden cut back into darkness. The next scene that I wish to examine is where things become much more complicated for the mystery narrative, and because of this, the style reinforces this complication.
You really think I'm in cahoots with that fella or her?
But let's go back a little. This sequence is where the narrative, after introducing its 3 key players of the eventual 8, John Roof, Daisy Domergue, and Major Mark West Warren, becomes a lot more interesting as a new player entering this once fortuitous stagecoach wagon shakes up the dynamics and momentary alliance between the aforementioned characters. Trust in the Hateful Eight is a fleeting commodity, but what's even more compelling about this sequence is how the stylistic elements evolving from the opening sequence, particularly in restricting and revealing narration, reinforce the duplicitous relationship between the characters, providing more questions than answers for the audience to play along at home. So let's go through this sequence shot by shot, starting from here. We start from a low angle medium shot of Roof and Daisy, with Roof's attention being called away by off-screen sound. The low angle, as per the typical convention of a low angle shot, highlights the power relation between the two characters, one a prisoner, the other a captor. The camera is placed between Roof and Daisy, with Daisy on the left hand side and Roof on the right. The subsequent long shot is what their attention was being called to off screen, a convention of continuity editing, the camera now stationed at the edge of the forest, using deep space with the tree positioned near and a mysterious figure in the far distance. In a sense, this shot has the effect of a POV shot without being one, showing what the off-screen sound was and highlighting the spatial distance between the characters. In order to ensure spatial and temporal continuity and linking the two spaces, Tarantino and his editor Fred Raskin elects to cut back to shot 1 for a reaction shot. Shot 4 then fills in the environment surrounding these two pieces of ongoing narrative action and plot progression, highlighting not only physical distance between the two occurrences, but also their relationship to one another. Ruth and Daisy being on the left-hand side of the frame of this deep space shot, with Warren next to the stagecoach, heading toward all the commotion. This shot effectively acts as a master shot for the rest of the sequence. The aspect ratio format allowing us greater freedom and width to gaze at this interplay between midground and background, with the lifeless forest looming prominently within the frame. Once again, we're encouraged to examine every inch of the frame. With the spatial relationships established, Tarantino now begins to play around with them. We then get a medium close-up of Ruth on the move leaving frame left, with Daisy being left behind with an abundance of negative space left on the right of frame, highlighting Ruth's departure. Daisy is alone now. Another shot with the same composition and camera placement as shot 4 continues Ruth's trajectory, as we see he is now heading to join Warren in the next plot beat. Tarantino and Raskin return to shot 5 as sound comes into play. The blizzard resounds, increasing in volume, perhaps an ominous warning as if pondering the events unfolding. Ruth now joins Warren with the camera on the move, tracking Ruth's forward momentum from behind with a forward dolly. Warren and Ruth stand on both sides of the mystery man in the far distance. The brewing conflict is now rendered visually through foreground and background, the conflict foregrounded and the source of the conflict in the background. A cut on an action brings the next shot of a threat being issued. Warren and Ruth are now in focus with the stagecoach and the surrounding forest slightly out of focus. This is a reverse shot of what has previously been established, with the familiar elements of the stagecoach ensuring spatial continuity. This reverse shot of the two characters is also essential to frame the next complex composition. The composition becomes more complex when this happens. Warren moving back reveals Daisy out of focus in the background. Her appearance now on the right side of frame suggests a potential treacherous relationship between Daisy and Warren. Maybe they're in cahoots. The staging, framing, and deep space creates and reflects the duplicitous relationship between these characters. The audience are then allowed to draw their own conclusions from the power of visual suggestion. The narration now uncertain, as different viewers can have different interpretations of who is playing who. Warren and Ruth are placed between two potential unknowns that fuel Ruth's conflict with Warren, aided by the changing placement of the camera, framing, and widescreen composition, allowing multiple planes to exist, multiple answers to the mystery. Through analyzing this sequence, it becomes clear that Tarantino's use of foreground and background, staging and camera placement, framing, movement, and choice of lens creates compositions that reinforce and build tension through the power of suggestion, held together with careful continuity editing that emphasizes chronology of these different narrative events, plot details, and shifts in narration. There are far more stylistic elements at play here compared to the opening sequence, as this sequence echoes the framework introduced in the opening sequence while also building to an uncertain climax. The interplay between these different pieces of narrative action creates a rhythmic game where narration is both withheld and subsequently revealed. The narration, our knowledge, oscillating between restricted and unrestricted, allowing the audience to play along and come to their own divergent conclusions. Things just got a lot more interesting heading to Minnie's haberdashery. Skipping ahead now with all 8 players assembled and with one already biting a bullet, the poisoned coffee pot sequence provides the culmination of everything that Tarantino has been building to stylistically in this film. It's also where the mystery reaches its most tantalizing peak within the narrative. Notably, at this point in the film, the audience has spent time in Minnie's haberdashery, an interior consisting of warm stew and bloody murder. The interior space offers no relief from the dangerous presence of a raging blizzard outside, and Tarantino, through a multitude of camera angles, movements, and staging, and of course his use of widescreen framing, has established the interiority of the space and the key points of interest within the mise-en-scène. As such, we will see Tarantino make every economic use of his stylistic elements. But once again, let's go through this sequence shot by shot, shall we? What is distinct about this sequence that sets it apart from any other sequence in the film aside from the opening credits sequence is the play with duration. Tarantino utilizes 2 to 3 long takes, restricting the audience's sense of space to one singular composition, thus restricting their knowledge of who could have poisoned the coffee, as the suspect can now operate both on and off screen. The restraint leads to a restriction, as Tarantino's editor Fred Rashkin points out.
I will say probably the most challenging sequence for me as an editor was the sequence preceding the massacre, because thanks to the 1 to 2.76 aspect ratio, you're seeing, we like to refer to each member of the gang as being in their own tableau, and frequently you're seeing another character's tableau in the background of any given shot. So we had to be very cognizant of who was where at what point in their action.
This allows interplay between off-screen and on-screen space, as the extended duration allows the different characters to wander in and out of frame. The audience's perspective, and as such the narration through careful staging and framing, is restricted to this composition, as the audience desperately looks to find the suspect who has poisoned the coffee. We know that the coffee is poisoned, but we don't know who. Our knowledge restricted and unrestricted. Once again, the aspect ratio and deep space composition allows a more democratic viewing experience, as the audience must scan the entire screen for each new tantalizing shred of oral visual evidence, like the previous 2 sequences and established in the cold open. This shot also serves to slowly establish the spatial relationships between each character for the subsequent slaughter. Each character takes their place. For example, we see Joe Gage moves to the left of frame. Tarantino and Richardson also employ a new trick, racking focus. Daisy in the foreground remains in focus, in stark contrast to her background, which remains unfocused, with the exceptions being when Daisy looks behind her to check on the haberdashery's ongoing proceedings, in which case racking focus is used. As such, we almost take on Daisy's subjective point of view, as she, like the audience, anticipates impending doom. The ballad she sings provides a sense of melancholy, a calm before the storm. All hell is about to break loose. In a sense, this is a classic case of Hitchcockian suspense, where the audience knows far more than the characters, and this is made even more tantalizing using perceptual subjectivity, as if the camera and Daisy are in cahoots, the audience unable to influence the events on screen. As John Roof approaches, the camera dollies back and tilts upwards when Daisy's lovely ballad ends, as if scuttling away after conferring deception with Daisy. Only we are privy to her secrets, and by extension trapped, held prisoner by the prisoner. Finally, a hard cut through a match on action with a close-up of Roof leads to a knowing, agonizing tilt down to Daisy. Tarantino, like Daisy, is provoking the audience. Notice how Albee, having already drunk from the devil's cup, walks in and out of frame. Again, the audience is helpless to stop him as he is operating off screen, his fate uncertain. Now once again, Tarantino starts to put the rest of his chess pieces into place, after teasing the main impending conflict of the scene. He does this by establishing other characters within the space with a few hard cuts, all the while continuing to build tension through the mundane activities. Many of our characters' knowledge is restricted around the haberdashery, contrasted with our unrestricted knowledge that the coffee has been poisoned. Bob is located still at the bar with Ozzy nearby. We then cut back to Daisy, as it would seem.
Give me that guitar. Music time's over.
A cut then to a shot with the camera now placed with a side-on perspective of Daisy and John, but it's the next shot in the sequence that provides an acute distillation and culmination of Tarantino's entire approach to the film style and how it reinforces the mystery narrative. Tarantino crafts an immaculate composition where several characters in a distinctive arrangement within the composition are coexisting within the same frame. Now, all of Tarantino's chess pieces are assembled, and the use of deep space, the wide aspect ratio, the staging, framing, and especially the interplay here with foreground and background allows the viewer to scan the screen for the suspect, the mystery. Tarantino is playing a game of whodunit and presents multiple different answers visually within the same frame, while also obscuring information through shallow focus, blurring the midground and background and thus withholding any vital information that might give away the perpetrator. He is both withholding and revealing narration through style. Tarantino has been building to this the entire film, constantly providing limited narration and providing suggestions and answers within the same frame, allowing the audience to try and fill in the gaps in the story through engaging with the mystery narrative. With Mannix lighting the candle, the fuse on the figurative bomb that is about to explode at any moment has been lit, with yet again Morricone's score, this time borrowed from the Thing's unused soundtrack, ratcheting up the tension in a thick blanket of murderous intent. There's also some fun play with sync sound as we're still chained to Daisy's secret. As the sequence continues, a split diopter shot, the first of several subsequent shots later in the film, provides another acute distillation of deep space composition, with foreground magnified and background in sharp focus. This links foreground and background together in an agonizing fashion, as it looks like Daisy's secret is about to befall another unknowing life. Notice as well that the hard light, presumably from a top light, draws our attention to Daisy and Ruth. Luckily for Chris Mannix, the timer runs out. We then return to the money shot, the game now revealed with characters looking on from the right and left of frame, our crime in the foreground and our murderer somewhere lurking in the background. A quick POV shot linking John's inevitable doom with OB in front of him. It's checkmate. Game over. Although, not quite. There's one element that I've saved to last to discuss, and that's the ninth hateful character in this film, if you will. A character that has always been present throughout the entire film. And that's the Blizzard.
That damn blasted blizzard has been on our ass for the last 3 hours.
But you didn't count on the blizzard, and you didn't count on the two of us.
Also, I did want the weather to be another character in the movie. So I did want a visual splendor and luster.
Tarantino's Blizzard is not only an ever-present visual reminder of the character's entrapment, but also an audible one. The sound of the blizzard looms heavily over the image, rising and falling in volume, with a distinctive timbre on the soundtrack, repeatedly acting as a sound bridge between shots.
But that damn show is Minnie's stew.
What's the matter, John Rue? I hurt your feelings. As a matter of fact, you did.
Yes, it's certainly a plot device, driving the characters to one limited location, but due to its auditory persistence, a claustrophobic sense of place and atmosphere never wavers, and it takes an active part in the brewing conflict and shapes certain plot beats.
Oh, God! Hold that shit, Chris.
Here!
The wailing winds accompany the sadistic, violent, and hateful treatment of others. A world of depravity is rendered through Tarantino's play with the film form, one that keeps us constantly guessing.
When you get to hell, John, tell him Daisy sent you.
The Hateful Eight is Tarantino at the height of his craft, where the style is in perfect harmony with the unfolding mystery narrative. Deep space composition, the use of aspect ratio, the staging of the characters in relationship to one another, the framing, placement, lens choice, the restraint shown through editing and economical movement of the camera in conjunction with sound, the constant presence of the Blizzard and Morecone score establishes and builds the unfolding mystery narrative. Tarantino uses these elements and more to craft sequences that build and climax effectively, using compositions to withhold, suggest, and reveal narration, the key knowledge needed to unravel the mystery. Tarantino has utilized many of these stylistic elements throughout his filmography.
Tu veux bien aller chercher du vin pour le colonel?
It is in The Hateful Eight that Tarantino, with the helping hand of Fred Raskin, Robert Richardson, and Ennio Morricone, his key creative collaborators, and the entirety of his creative team, that these stylistic elements coalesce to create masterful sequences that evolve as different interactions between characters are established, and the stylistic elements, the building blocks of any sequence in film, are positioned. As such, The Hateful Eight, through its layered compositions, obscuring and subsequently revealing narration, narrative, and plot details, creates a more liberal and democratic reading of the film, with each new piece of visual and auditory evidence contributing to a mystery that encourages the viewer to play along and put the puzzle pieces together. The viewer is entirely in Tarantino's hands. While The Hateful Eight, like many of Tarantino's films, remix most prominently Carpenter's The Thing and Sergio Corbucci's The Great Silence, as well as Tarantino's own Reservoir Dogs, I hope this analysis has argued successfully that Tarantino is not just a remix artist playing with genre prestige or a confident and acclaimed screenwriter. He's a sophisticated craftsman where style meets story to create a compelling aesthetic whole.